She let her disabled sister hit me, steal from me, and sleep in my room, then called me the problem. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to a crack across the side of your head so hard your ears start ringing. You open your eyes just in time to see a figure bolt out the door. And when you tell the people who are supposed to protect you, they say absolutely nothing. Not one word. That is where this story ends up. But to understand how we got there, we need to go back to the beginning. Our narrator is 18 years old, fresh out of high school, trying to figure out how to build a life near her college campus without drowning in expenses she cannot afford yet. She is at that exact age where independence feels thrilling and terrifying in equal measure, where every decision feels enormous, and where the wrong living situation can derail everything. Her brother Mark, who is 40, and his wife Anne, who is 38, step in with what sounds like a genuinely generous offer. There is a spare room in a house near campus, it is free of charge, and all she has to do in return is help manage the accounting for Anne's Airbnb property next door. That is a real skill, it is useful work, and for an 18-year-old trying to get on her feet, this sounds like an incredible opportunity. She would have somewhere safe to sleep, money she could save instead of spend, and family nearby if things got hard. And for a minute, maybe it really was. The house itself is mostly quiet. Mark travels constantly and is rarely home, the kind of absence that fills a space in its own particular way, where you know help is technically available but never actually within reach. And works abroad and is not around much either. The two people who are regularly present are a pair of cleaners who come to maintain the place, and Anne's sister Leah, who is 56 years old and has a learning disability that causes her to function cognitively at roughly the level of an 8 to 12-year-old child. Our narrator had met Leah before, and in those brief, occasional encounters she had seemed manageable enough. Perfectly fine, even. But there is an enormous difference between meeting someone at a family gathering and sharing a house with them every single day. Living together full-time with someone is an entirely different reality, and that reality turned out to be something nobody warned her about and nobody prepared her for. Nobody sat her down and explained what that dynamic would look like in practice. Nobody told her what to do when things went wrong. She was just placed into the situation and expected to figure it out. The first major issue was the clothes. Our narrator mentions she arrived with only a suitcase and a half worth of belongings, which means every single item she owns is accounted for and matters deeply. These are not just objects. For a young woman living away from home for the first time, her clothes are part of her identity, her confidence, her sense of self. Leah began taking clothes while they were hanging out to dry, plucking them from the line as though they were simply available, as though ownership was a concept that did not apply to her. When confronted, Leah insisted the clothes had belonged to her late mother and had been hers since she was a teenager. That claim was simply not true. The items were new, they were hers, and the denial was complete and unwavering. And when our narrator pushed back on it, Leah would escalate into major tantrums, screaming and carrying on, her voice filling the house, her distress genuine even if the reasoning behind it was not. For an 18-year-old living in someone else's house with no backup and no ally in the building, those moments must have felt genuinely terrifying and deeply isolating. There was nobody to call into the room. Nobody to step between them. Just our narrator, alone, trying to hold her ground against an adult woman in full emotional meltdown over clothes that were not hers. Then it escalated further. After the first serious argument about the stolen clothes, Leah decided she had a new response available to her whenever our narrator walked through the kitchen. She would grab a large bar stool and swing it at her. Not once. Multiple times. This happened on more than one occasion, meaning our narrator had to navigate her own kitchen, the room where she made her meals and went about the most basic routines of daily life, with the constant awareness that she might be physically struck with a heavy object if she moved in the wrong direction at the wrong time. Picture that for a moment. Picture walking toward the refrigerator and having to calculate whether it was safe to be in your own kitchen. Picture the way your body would begin to tense before you even opened the door, the way you would listen for sounds in the hallway, the way ordinary domestic life would become something you had to brace yourself for. That is not a difficult living situation. That is not a personality clash. That is a physically unsafe environment, and no amount of goodwill or rent-free arrangements changes that fact. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. She was being hit with a bar stool in the kitchen. And nobody in that house treated it like the emergency it absolutely was. And was not present for most of this, so our narrator did what any reasonable person would do. She locked her bedroom door. It was the simplest, most fundamental act of self-protection available to her. One lock on one door, creating one room in the entire house where she could exhale, where she did not have to be on guard, where she could sleep without wondering what might happen. That lock was not an act of cruelty. It was survival. But Leah complained too, and that she was being locked out of the room, framing it as rejection, as exclusion, as something being done to her rather than something being done to keep our narrator safe. And Anne's response was immediate and absolute. "This is my house," she told our narrator, her voice carrying all the authority of ownership and none of the compassion of family. "You do not get to tell my sister where she can and cannot go." The lock came off. Our narrator's last place of refuge in that house was dismantled by the very person who had invited her in, the person who had presented this arrangement as an act of generosity. Let that sink in. She had one locked door. That was it. And it was taken from her. With the door no longer an option, the situation reached its most disturbing point. After another major argument, one in which Leah had stolen a good pair of jeans right off the drying line with the particular boldness of someone who has learned there are no consequences, Leah walked into our narrator's bedroom while she was asleep. The room was dark. Our narrator was unconscious, completely vulnerable, completely unaware. And Leah hit her in the head. Hard enough that her ears rang, that disorienting, nauseating sensation of pain arriving before understanding does. Hard enough that she described seeing Leah run out the door as she was still trying to process what had just happened to her, her mind catching up slowly to the reality that she had been struck in her sleep. She was not awake to defend herself. She was not awake to walk away. She was asleep, in a room that should have been locked, in a house that should have been safe. Our narrator told her brother. Mark told Anne. And said nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was no apology, no conversation, no acknowledgement that what had happened was completely unacceptable. Just silence. The kind of silence that communicates a position more clearly than any words could. The situation finally came to a head over a Pandora bracelet. Leah took it and denied it, the way she had denied taking so many other things before, with total conviction, with the same story, with the same certainty. But this time our narrator had something new. Camera footage. Real, undeniable, time-stamped evidence showing exactly what had happened and exactly when. She showed it to Leah, who became aggressive, her denial colliding with the footage and producing not remorse but fury. She showed it to Anne, and this is where the response became genuinely revealing. Anne did not respond by addressing the theft. She did not look at the footage and acknowledge what it showed. Instead, Anne accused our narrator of discriminating against Leah because of her disability, as though the act of producing evidence was itself a form of persecution, and announced she wanted to kick her out. Mark intervened and managed to prevent that from happening, but the damage was already done. The position had been stated clearly. Evidence was not welcome if it reflected badly on Leah. And then laid out her actual position in full. Even if she caught Leah stealing her clothes on camera, she had no right to confront her. Our narrator pointed out the obvious question: at what point does confronting someone become acceptable if catching them in the act on video is still not enough? And said it did not matter. She should have brought the issue to Anne or Mark instead, funneling every grievance through a system that had already proven itself useless. Our narrator explained that she had done exactly that for months, raising concerns, flagging incidents, hoping something would change. And nothing ever came back to her. Her things were not returned, Her concerns were dismissed, and the only time anything shifted was when she confronted Leah directly or had someone else physically present to mediate. The official channel and was insisting on had never once produced a result. So our narrator made a decision. She told them she wanted to move out. She said she was going back to her grandparents temporarily while she saved up for a deposit on a dorm situation, a plan that was measured and reasonable and born from months of being failed. And Anne's reaction to that announcement revealed everything. She did not apologize. She did not sit with the weight of what our narrator had endured under her roof. She did not express any concern for the well-being of the 18-year-old girl she had invited into her home. She told our narrator that nobody was going to do the accounting if she left. After everything that had happened, after the stolen clothes and the bar stool and the broken lock and the blow to the head in the middle of the night, Anne's primary concern was losing her free labor. I just want everyone to hear that out loud. After the hitting, the stealing, the broken lock, the blow to the head, after all of it, the response to "I want to leave" was, "But who will do my accounting?" Now let us talk about what is really happening here, because our narrator genuinely asks whether she is the one discriminating against Leah. And I want to address that directly and clearly. Discrimination means treating someone unfairly based on a characteristic they have no control over. What our narrator was doing was documenting theft and protecting herself from physical harm. Those are not the same thing. Acknowledging that a disabled person has done something wrong is not discrimination. Holding a person accountable for their actions, regardless of their cognitive level, is not cruelty. What would actually be cruel is ignoring the situation entirely, which is exactly what Anne was doing. The real question here is not whether our narrator discriminated against Leah. The real question is whether Anne and Mark failed catastrophically in their responsibility to create a safe and fair living environment for an 18-year-old girl they invited into their home. And the answer to that question is yes, completely and without any reasonable defense. Lee's disability means she needs support, structure, and guidance from the adults around her. It does not mean everyone else in the house has to absorb theft, physical violence, and the destruction of their property in silence. The person who failed Leah here is Anne, who protected her from consequences instead of helping her understand them. Our narrator was not the problem in this house. She was the youngest person there, trying to survive in a situation that was stacked against her from the moment the door lock came off. She did the work she was asked to do. She tried to resolve things quietly. She documented evidence. She went through proper channels. And every single time, she was punished for it. Moving out is not just the right decision. It is the only decision. Getting out, rebuilding her savings, and finding a space where her physical safety is not up for debate is the most self-respecting move she could make. She is 18. She has her whole life ahead of her. None of this was ever her burden to carry. My sister demanded a full hotel weekend for Mother's Day and lost it when I said no. It is 9:30 in the morning, and she is already getting the messages. Hurry up. Get here. It is her weekend. Her weekend, being coordinated entirely by someone who is not actually a mother on Mother's Day. And she is already over it. Let us set the scene properly because context matters here. Our narrator lived with her twin sister and her niece for the first 5 years of that little girl's life. 5 years. That is not casual involvement. That is not the kind of thing you can summarize in a single sentence and move on from. That is waking up in the middle of the night when someone else's child is sick. That is rearranging your own schedule, your own social life, your own sense of personal space to make room for a small human who needs consistency and love and presence. That is the kind of dedication that shapes a child from the inside out, that fills in the gaps quietly and without fanfare, that shows up every single day in ways that nobody outside the household ever fully sees or appreciates or thinks to thank you for. She has consistently made Mother's Day special for her sister because there is no partner in the picture to do it, and our narrator understood that without being told and stepped up, year after year, without complaint and without being asked twice. That history matters because it tells you exactly who this person is before the conflict even begins. She is not someone who resents her sister or looks for excuses to do less. She is someone who has built her sense of family around showing up generously, and she has done it long enough that it has simply become expected. This year started the sweetest way imaginable. The niece, who is now 6 years old, came up with her own idea entirely. She wanted to take her mom to lunch, go to the dog beach, and get her flowers. 6 years old, and she put together a thoughtful, specific, loving plan that reflected exactly what her mom would enjoy. Think about that for a moment. A child who is barely old enough to tie her own shoes sat down and thought carefully about what would make her mother feel special and came up with something personal and joyful and completely on brand for their little family. Our narrator heard that plan and said yes immediately, without hesitation, because of course she did. That is the kind of gesture worth supporting with your whole chest. It was earnest, it came from the right place, and it involved the dogs, which is always a good sign in any story. Then the sister called. And the plan changed completely. The sister did not want lunch and the dog beach. She wanted a full weekend, a hotel room in a beach town 2.5 hours away, the dogs included, the whole production planned and executed like a proper getaway. She wanted an experience, a trip, a mini vacation, and she wanted it organized and presumably funded in large part by our narrator, for a holiday that is specifically and explicitly about celebrating mothers. Our narrator is not a mother. She is a sister. A deeply involved, historically generous, consistently present sister who has given 5 years of daily life to this family unit, but not a mother. And the hotel and the distance and the coordination and the cost involved in what was now being requested represented a significant investment of time and energy and money that our narrator had never agreed to and had not budgeted for emotionally or financially. What I find fascinating about this is the confidence. The absolute, unexamined certainty that this was a reasonable ask. Our narrator did not just refuse and walk away, which would have been understandable. She negotiated. She proposed a middle ground, which is honestly more grace than most people would extend in this situation after feeling the shift from sweet family plan to full travel demand. Instead of the hotel getaway, she offered to drive up from Fort Lauderdale to Boca Raton, which is still a real commitment of time and effort, and take her sister, her niece, and the dogs to a closer beach for the full day. That is still a meaningful outing. That is still an entire Sunday given over to celebrating her sister. That is still flowers and quality time and sand and water and the dogs doing whatever dogs do at the beach, just without the hotel bill and the 5 hours of round-trip driving and the logistical weight of an overnight trip. The sister agreed. So it seemed, reasonably, like they had found a place both of them could live with. But then 9:30 arrived and the messages started. Hurry up. Get here. It is her weekend. The phrase doing the heaviest lifting in this situation is her weekend, because it quietly reveals the belief that has been operating underneath this entire dynamic from the very beginning. The sister does not experience our narrator's generosity as a choice being made freely and lovingly. She experiences it as something owed. She sees the planning and the driving and the spending and the time as obligations that exist independently of gratitude, obligations that must be fulfilled on schedule, to specification, without delay or inconvenience to the person being served. There is something deeply uncomfortable about watching someone receive a gift and respond by demanding it be delivered faster. Here's where I think the real tension lives in this story. Our narrator is not her sister's husband. She is not the co-parent who made a lifelong commitment. She is not the person who made the decision to bring a child into the world. She loves her sister completely. She loves that little girl completely, and her years of daily presence prove that love beyond any reasonable argument. But there is a meaningful and important difference between choosing to celebrate someone out of genuine love and affection and being told that you are required to do so on a detailed schedule because it has been declared someone else's weekend. One of those is a gift freely given. The other is a chore assigned without consent and then monitored for timely completion. The sister has a 6-year-old who independently came up with a beautiful and simple plan rooted entirely in love. That little girl wanted flowers and lunch and the dog beach. She did not dream up a hotel 2.5 hours away. She wanted her mom and her aunt and the dogs at a beach, together, which is precisely what ended up happening. The original plan, the one that came from the purest and most uncomplicated place in this entire story, was already perfect before anyone made a phone call. The escalation that followed was never really about making the day more meaningful. It was about scale. It was about expectation. It was about a sense of entitlement that quietly transformed a loving tradition into a negotiation where one person held all the demands and the other person held all the responsibilities. Let us be clear about what our narrator actually did here. She drove to another city. She organized the outing. She brought the dogs. She showed up, and she showed up willingly, even after the demands and the pressure had already begun to curdle the whole thing and make it feel less like a celebration born of love and more like a performance review she had to pass by a certain time. Most people, after receiving that kind of impatient messaging before 10 in the morning on their day off, would have felt their goodwill dissolving in real time and made different choices. The fact that she still got in the car and drove says everything that needs to be said about who she is as a person. The sister needs to take a step back and sit with what she actually has. She has a sibling who lived alongside her for 5 years and showed up as a genuine partner in raising that child. She has someone who has made Mother's Day meaningful year after year without needing to be convinced. She has someone who, when asked for more than was reasonable, negotiated instead of walking away. And she has someone who still showed up after being hounded on a Sunday morning before the day had barely started. None of that is duty. All of that is a gift. And when you treat gifts like duties, when you stop seeing the person behind the gesture and only see the service they provide, you risk losing them in a way that cannot simply be undone with an apology later. Our narrator is not the asshole here. Not even close. She went above and beyond, she found a compromise, and she showed up anyway. If the sister cannot recognize the difference between someone who loves her and someone who owes her, that is a problem she needs to sit with on her own. Because the person driving to Boca on a Sunday morning for someone who is not even her mom? That person deserves some appreciation. Full stop. Drop a comment below telling me which story hit harder for you. And if you made it all the way through both of these, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you know.